Does no one here care about my vision?
And I don't know how you can call yourself a scientist and not worship at the altar of Roddenberry.
Oh, how are we going to get to this one, Captain? Oh, I don't know. Something to do with the tachyon emitter?
This is what you people don't understand. A man named Gene Roddenberry had a vision.
Guys, knock it off.
Strange New Worlds. Episode review. I would like the review to go now. Well, folks, we're back with another episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We're in the third season. We're up to episode 4 of that third season. This is one we're supposed to be excited about, folks. This is the one they've been throwing out as the best of the season and the greatest thing that Jonathan Frakes has ever directed. It's also known as a Space Adventure Hour. Now, just a warning that spoilers do lie ahead. If those aren't for you, this is your last warning. Let's crack into the show. I would assume after watching this episode, there's going to be plenty of people out there with all sorts of differing upsetities. And sure, we're going to pretend that's a word for this video. The biggest thing we should probably tackle first in this one is all of the canon breaking issues, whether or not they're canon breaking or not, and whether or not I have any opinions on them since this is my video. So let's go ahead and start with the biggest one, the issue of the holodeck, the biggest canon-breaking issue that people are seemingly going to be talking about here. In order for it to be canon-breaking in the first place, we'd have to go ahead and assume that this is actually the original Star Trek universe to begin with. So assuming we're going to take that at face value, Strange New Worlds itself has gone out of their way to show us and give us episodes altering the timeline with Romulan time agents, moving the eugenics wars, things like that. So whether or not this is even the original TOS era like it's supposed to be is up in the air. Secondly, at least as far as I'm personally concerned when canon-breaking things go into effect, if I can cobble together any sort of reasonable enough explanation based on what's shown on screen and just using a little creative extrapolation, that doesn't bother me, and it actually kind of makes the episode more interesting and fun to think about. I know that's probably not the same for a lot of people who just want it explicitly stated on the screen, and that's what they're going to live with. In my estimation, I really don't think this is too early for the holodeck to be introduced in some shape or form. They made it pretty clear in this episode that a whole lot of issues were cropping up. They had the power requirements that weren't met. They had the memory requirements that weren't met. Scotty was running around like 17 chickens with their heads cut off, just trying to keep things from not falling apart. There were resolution errors they had to draw from the transporter to even get patterns of people. So they were showing a lot of issues. And I know I'm doing a lot of the heavy lifting here as far as trying to put things together, but it makes sense to me that following the events of this episode, they had to kind of put the holodeck on the back burner to retool it, to try and figure out the flaws, and they eventually brought out a more streamlined and a more dumbed down version that was much more compatible, and that was the recreation deck or the recreation deck, whatever you want to call it, that we saw in the animated series. And while I know the animated series is debatable as far as its canonicity, I'm going to say right now, for the purposes of this discussion and video, it is actually the events that took place after the third season of the original series, and we'll just live with that. To me, it seems like eventually, after retooling this, having a more dumbed-down version, once we got a much better and bigger version of Starfleet, they came up with isolinear tech that became the norm across the fleet. They started building big old luxury resort ships like the Enterprise D. It became much more viable to add the whole shebang of the original technology version of the holodeck, which is probably even increased a lot more than it looked like in this episode. Now, that being said, you can absolutely feel in this episode the hand of the writers, or the writer, or whoever came up with this. They definitely wanted to be able to use an item. So for the purposes of the show, they wanted to use it, so they found a way to use it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And this is pretty much the same reason I think they had to bring back the look of the holodeck from TNG. I know people have felt like that's too on the nose and a little too advanced, and personally, I think that's true. The black and yellow color grid was mostly done out of universe to be just a simple visual cue that the audience would know. It probably should be much more of a prototypical mess falling apart, not really all that clean looking, but for the purposes of the writers and the creatives here, I think they just wanted to put something on screen that evoked nostalgia. Narrative reasons aside, it's just a big shiny thing you can point at and say, ooh, I know what that is, without having a second thought about it. So narratively, maybe it should have looked different, but as far as an aesthetic choice to visually let the casual audiences know what they're looking at, that's probably why they picked the TNG era version of something. Along the same lines, we also kind of have to deal with the canon issues of Scotty here. No, I'm not talking about just his age. I'm talking mostly about this episode and his connection with the holodeck. So we know that he lived through the animated series where he saw the wreck deck. Okay, that kind of tracks with what we saw here, I suppose. But then the biggest thing I've seen called out is relics. In relics, he didn't know what a holodeck was. It was kind of this newfangled thing I think it was Data was telling him about, that could recreate his original ship. There's two possible in-universe answers that we have already seen to address this. First, and probably the most likely one, is his transporter aphasia. We saw in Relics that after spending nearly 80 years stuck in a Heisenbergian limbo, this is the same excuse that he used as to why he thought Captain Kirk was still alive, even though he was standing there on the Enterprise D in Generations during the events of Kirk's kind of sort of actual death in Generations as far as he was concerned. So why did he not know about that, aside from the fact that the shows were written out of order? Transporter aphasia. Same thing here. He could have just misremembered all of his historical dealings with holodecks and wreck decks, whatever. Also, the second option, and the one that I find much, much more interesting, is... Oh, there's actually a third canon issue we're dealing with here that's not exclusive to this episode. It's an ongoing thing, and that has to be with La'an, who has now apparently completed her trauma and is now able to level up into a real girl. I have no problem with her character having any progression or changing or evolving throughout the course of the show. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking specifically about the whole creation and the burgeoning romance and this whole Spa'an ship that we seem to be heading towards. And yes, it actually has to be Spa'an, since the other ship name has already been taken. On one hand, I feel like she and Spock actually do make an interesting pairing, but on the other hand, I am more than sick and tired of this entire Spock humping his way through the Enterprise prior to TOS. I really don't want any more of these complicated love triangles and all of that stuff. I just want them to move past that and get into telling stories that don't explicitly involve, I keep saying explicitly too much, but I just want them to have other storylines to tell, not just personal romances between all of our characters and Spock. It's mostly every character gets a turn with Spock at some point or another. That really isn't the whole problem, though. It's the Nudian sing of the situation. Still, that's not exclusively the fault of this episode, and since we haven't seen how things play out, we really can't make a call as to how that will impact canon, if it does at all. So, again, that's something to just keep an eye out while we watch the rest of these 2.5 seasons, I guess, we have left.
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe.
It looks like we finally have a nail in the coffin for those folks clamoring for it to have been Sherlock Holmes, to whom Spock was related as per Star Trek VI.
An ancestor of mine maintained that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Here we are definitively told it is not Sherlock Holmes, it is...
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle would write. The game is afoot.
Personally, that's always been my assumption anyways, but there's always been this hardcore Sherlock defenders out there who are probably going to be pretty upset with this entire lack of whimsy as far as that explanation goes. Now, while I did find the actual mystery within the Holo program to be a bit lacking, I guess you could say, as far as the mystery aspect surrounding it goes, the clues that we weren't watching the actual real Spock really do work a lot better, especially on the second viewing, than I initially thought on my first watch. For example, we hear the holodeck doors opening on a couple different occasions, but we never actually see Spock either exit or enter. We just get the sound cues from around a corner. And there were also references outside the holodeck where every time they were talking about the characters in the holodeck, it was only ever referred to as La'an or she is trapped in the holodeck. There was never a they or a reference to Spock being in there as well. So things like that do hold up a bit better than I thought. And in the midst of this, we also get that really cute scene between baby Scotty and baby Uhura, which might be setting up the groundwork for their eventual and completely random romance that was shown in the Star Trek films. I suppose I can't drag it out any longer. What about those holodeck programs? Canon issues notwithstanding, I absolutely believe this is where this episode's going to either live or die for people. Not only did we get a parody or a send-up or a referential quasi-story something, but we also wove it into the real world behind-the-scenes history, complete with not Shatner, not Gene, not I Love Lucy, and, I suppose, dead, not Ricky Ricardo? Everything's probably going to come down to how well you enjoyed this aspect as to how much you enjoyed the episode overall. Now, like I stated before, I was initially fairly disappointed with how the murder mystery was actually written and shown in the story of that. I guess I wanted it to be more of a standard, let's solve this mystery and find clues that you can piece together throughout the episode to figure out who the real culprit is, with a bunch of interesting and wacky interactions with our kooky characters in a fun aesthetic setting. And it quickly became apparent, however, that this setting was literally just that. It was a setting, it was the background, it was the set dressing for the actual events of the episode, and it was really just there to playfully poke fun at where everything started with Trek. In much the same way that last episode wasn't actually really about zombies at all, they were really just there as a sandbox for the events of the Mbenga Klingon revenge story to play out within. So here's where I really need to fall back on my own rule. You can never judge a piece of work for what it isn't, but you always need to judge it for what it is. And I know that has exceptions and all that stuff, but in this episode, for what it is far from perfect, but it's probably the most interesting one that we've had this season, at least to me. And I am very, very curious to see how this episode landed with people with either little or no knowledge of what they were actually trying to spoof here. On one level, the cheesy effects and the overacting on display with the space adventure part, the story within the story, they were pretty easy to tell and differentiate and to figure out, yeah, this was probably making fun of the original 60s Star Trek, but they did go a bit overboard in some instances, and my favorite parts were probably the alternate opening and closing credits for this episode. How did all of the murder mystery guests land for you, especially if you didn't catch any of the real-world parallels that they were trying to accomplish here? Does this episode have enough to win you over on its own merits without any of the send-ups or the in-jokes or anything like that? That's not really something I'm qualified to say, or I guess you could say I'm overqualified to judge this, and I'm just kind of curious what you think. If you really didn't catch any of those things, was this a good enough episode for you? One last thought before I go here. Does Strange New Worlds actually have any truly memorable or outstanding episodes? Pause. Wait for me to finish the question. That aren't gimmicks. That is to say, when you're thinking about the show overall, what episodes stick out to you? For me, I feel like the musical episode, the Lower Decks crossover, we're going to have puppets. What is an actual definitive episode of Strange New Worlds? To me, just kind of thinking on it without looking anything up, the closest to a classic Trek staple we might have here is Ad Astra, but it's leading me to wonder, is this show actually going to be just primarily remembered for its wacky conceptual episodes, or will there be a few standout episodes like Measure of a Man or something that we're still looking at 30, 40 years down the line and saying, man, that was a real mind-bending Star Trek episode? Tell me all your thoughts down below. How's this season shaping up for you? What did you think of this episode? Did the fun parodies work for you, or were they really mean-spirited and way too over the top for you? Whatever you think, leave all that down below, and while you're there, like, share, subscribe, join, and do all those YouTube things. Until next time.
Hit subscribe.